Because I imagine it was an awful lot like that on that first Palm Sunday. I bet it was pretty much like that day. Did we run out? Not quite. I have to dump some more in there though, right? I'm almost out. All right. Yeah. Thank you, guys. Yeah, I imagine that it was a lot like that on that first Palm Sunday. We have a painting, a picture here of one of those times where you see the people waving their palm branches. This is mostly grown-ups, but you know what? Back in those days when there were grown-ups around, there were kids around too. There were probably a bunch of kids waving palm branches and having just a great time. It was a wonderful party, a noisy celebration. In fact, in one of the scriptures, the church leaders said, "Can't you ask these people to be quiet?" And Jesus said, "If I did, even the stones would cry out." It needed to be celebrated. And Jesus celebrated that day. Unlike most of his life, he tried to keep a low profile. He didn't want people to tell others who he was. He wanted them to find out. He didn't ride into the city in any way. He usually just kind of went in with his group of people and they went about their business. But that day was different. That day he rode in like the Messiah, on a donkey, unridden. Not like a conquering military hero, but like the Messiah, the suffering servant. And the crowds cheered. They were happy and they were joyful. What a great beginning to the week, huh? How would you like to have that kind of start to your week? And you know, last week was kind of like that. Remember last Sunday? Remember how nice it was? I don't know, did it get up to 70 that day? I think it felt like it if it didn't. It was beautiful, it was warm. The grass was starting to show signs of life. I could drive through my driveway without fear of sinking up to the doors in the mud. It was wonderful. What a difference a week makes, huh? It made a big difference for a lot of us, especially those of you that are out on the farm and dealing with calving and all of that. It was a tough end to the week, but not as tough as Jesus. See, about Thursday night, Friday morning of that week, his life changed a little bit. It says here in Mark's Gospel, chapter 15, very early in the morning, the chief priests with the elders and the teachers of the law and the whole Sanhedrin made their plans. So they bound Jesus, they led him away, and handed him over to Pilate. And Pilate says, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus replied, "You have said so." And the chief priests accused him of many things. So Pilate asked him, "Aren't you going to answer? See how many things they are accusing you of." But Jesus made no reply. Pilate was amazed. Now, it was his practice during the festival to release one prisoner that the people had requested. There was a man named Barabbas who was in prison with the insurrectionists who had committed murder in the uprising. And the crowd came up and they asked Pilate to do for them what he usually did. "Do you want me to release to you the king of the Jews?" asked Pilate, knowing it was out of self-interest that the chief priests had handed Jesus over to him. But the chief priests had stirred up the crowds to have Pilate release Barabbas instead. "But what then shall I do with the one that you call the king of the Jews?" "Crucify him," they cried out. "Why? What crime has he committed?" asked Pilate. But they shouted all the louder, "Crucify him!" And wanting to satisfy the crowd, Pilate released Barabbas to them. He had Jesus flogged and handed him over to be crucified. You know, I'm positive that day outside of Pilate's palace, that there were people there who had been there at the beginning of the week when Jesus rode in, who were shouting, Hosanna! And now, because of the chief priests, the scribes, the crowd around them, they're shouting, crucify him. And so, he was handed over to the soldiers. It says the soldiers led Jesus away into the palace, that is the praetorium, and they called together the whole company of soldiers. They put a purple robe on him, they twisted together a crown of thorns, and they set it on him. And they began to call out to him, Hail, King of the Jews! Again and again they struck him on the head and with a staff, and they spit on him, and then they fell to their knees, and they paid homage to him. And when they had mocked him, he took off the purple robe and put on his own clothes, and they led him out to crucify him. Now the soldiers, the soldiers were doing what they did to every prisoner. Humiliate, mock. That's what they did. Doesn't make it right, but that's what they did. And they didn't see this Jesus as anybody special. They were Roman soldiers, for goodness sakes. They didn't know what the Jewish people were talking about. If they did, they didn't care. And so they did what they did. And they led Jesus off to be crucified. And he walked a long, long walk, carrying his cross. It says that a certain man from Cyrene, Simon, father of Alexander and Rufus, was passing by on his way in from the country, and they forced him to carry the cross. They brought Jesus to the place called Golgotha, the place of the skull. I'm sure Rufus didn't get up that morning thinking, heck, I'm going to head into Jerusalem and carry some guy's cross up to the hill where he gets crucified. That was the last thing on his mind that day. I don't know if he even knew Jesus. Maybe he heard of him, maybe not. But I always wonder what went through his mind. What did he think? Who did he think this guy was that couldn't carry the cross, and so he had to carry it? Did he know that this was Jesus, the Christ? Had he ever heard of him, or was he just another criminal who was going to be crucified, who was going to be eliminated from the problems that he had caused? We'll never know until we get to heaven, and we can ask him if it's still important to us. So they led him up and crucified him. They offered him wine mixed with myrrh, but he didn't take it. And then they crucified him, and they divided up his clothing, casting lots. It was 9 in the morning when they crucified him. The written notice of the charge against him read this way: the King of the Jews. They crucified him with 2 criminals, one on his right, one on his left. Those who passed by hurled insults at him, shaking their heads and saying, "So you were going to destroy the temple and build it in 3 days? Come down from the cross, save yourself." The same way the chief priests, the scribes, the Pharisees, they all mocked him. He saved others, they said, but he can't save himself. Let this Messiah, this King of Israel, come down from the cross that we may see and believe. And those who were crucified with him also hurled insults at him. I'm sure this crowd that stood below the cross and mocked Jesus that day, there were people that had been there as he came into the city, that had shouted, "Hosanna! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. This is the Christ, the Son of God." They were excited that day. This day, all they could think of was, what were we thinking? Here he is hanging on the cross. He's nobody special. He's nobody. This is what he deserves. At noon, darkness came over the whole land until 3 in the afternoon. At 3 in the afternoon, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? Some of those standing near him said, he's calling to Elijah. Someone ran and filled a sponge with wine vinegar and put it up to his lips for Jesus to drink. They said, now leave him alone. Let's see if Elijah comes to take him down. But with a loud cry, Jesus breathed his last. The curtain in the temple was torn in two from top to bottom, and the centurion who stood there in front of Jesus saw how he died, and he said, surely this man was the Son of God. This whole week was a week of people trying to figure out who this guy is. You know, it seemed like the beginning of the week seemed like they got it. This is the Son of God. That's what he'd been telling his disciples. That's what people had been saying. That's what had been going on. And he said, surely they know now. Although Jesus knew better. And for a few days, things were pretty good. People listened, people heard, they believed in him, and they were excited. What a difference the week makes. And some of those same ones that seemed to have gotten it stood there outside of Pilate's hall. They didn't know who he was. Crucify him. He's just a criminal. They stood at the base of the cross. They didn't know who this was. They said, why can't you come down if you really are a Messiah? Just get off the cross. But a Roman soldier who probably knew nothing about this man, who probably had no clue who this was, he got it. He got it. He knew who this was. Not because someone had told him. Not because he read it in a book somewhere. Not because the chief priests and the scribes said, you need to believe in this guy because he's the Son of God. No, he knew. Because God revealed it to him. He knew because he knew. I wish there was a magic formula. That we could just say, well, you do this, and do that, and you'll know it's God. There really isn't. I mean, there's a formula, yes. You read the Bible, you believe in what Jesus Christ did, you accept him into your heart, but it's more than just that. Those are just words quite often, just how we feel at the moment. The centurion, he didn't read the Bible. I'm sure he never went to Sunday school. Probably never came to a church service. Oh, I'm sure he, worshipped some gods by giving some food to the temple or whatever, but he wasn't a religious man, he was a soldier. But at the base of the cross, he found Christ. He found the Son of God. I like to believe that his life went on and was changed, and I hope that it was. But we really don't know. I mean, there's a belief in the Catholic Church that he went on to become one of their saints. I don't know whether that's true or not, but whatever the case may be, he got it. And so this week, as we consider what happens and what happened, from palms and excitement to the passion of Christ, to the cross, where he died. The question remains, who is this man? Who is this man? Is he the Son of God? Is he the Messiah? Is he just some rabble-rouser that's trying to make trouble for the organized church of the day? Is he someone worthy to be crucified? Is he just another criminal? The question is, not who does someone else say he is? Not who does my parents, my mom, my dad, my cousins, my aunts, my uncles, my friends. It's not what they say. It's what do I say? What do you say? Who do you say he is? That's the question of Holy Week leading into Easter. Who do we say that this man is? And you know, it's real easy for us to say what we're supposed to say. You know, I did confirmation and I wasn't real concerned about who Jesus was, and so they said, you have to say this, so I said it. It took a little while for me to really know who this man is. And there's a lot of folks around that will tell you who Jesus is. At least who Jesus is to them. And they may or may not be right. We can read the scriptures, that, you know, we might not understand them. We might think they mean something other than what somebody else thinks they mean. We don't. We're not given the gift of perfect interpretation. So reading the scriptures is good. Listening to other people, hearing what the Sunday school teachers and the confirmation teachers and all those folks that give us instruction, that's great. But it gets right down to this. It's, who do you say he is? It doesn't matter what your Sunday school teacher says. It's got to be who you say he is. See, it's the church, the Christian faith, is a corporate faith, but it's an individual choice. We worship together, but it's each one of us making that choice, deciding who Jesus is to us. So as we go through this week, as you ponder what happened, and as we come together on Good Friday to consider that final breath that Jesus took on this earth, think about it. Who is Jesus to you? Not to me, not to anybody else, but to you. Because the key to all of this is Jesus wants you to believe what he did. He wants you to follow him. Everybody else does, that's great. He wants them also. But he wants you. So decide. Who do you say that he is?